Is Donald Trump a fascist? Is he undermining democracy? What's going on in the world and where is it going? Those are questions that millions of people have been asking in the past months. And those are the questions that we will try to answer in this week's podcast. And with us, I have Alan Woods, a Marxist theoretician and author of a whole series of books. Amongst those are Bolshevism, The Road to Revolution, which is the history of the Russian Bolshevik Party, The History of Philosophy, a Marxist perspective, which is self-explanatory, and The Class Struggles in Rome. Now, Alan is here today to discuss his latest work, which is an article called The Meaning of Donald Trump, a Marxist Analysis. This article will be published tomorrow on our website, marxist.com, on the 21st of March. If you're watching this after the 21st of March, we will link in the description to this article. If you're watching on the 20th, then you will have to wait in anticipation. Welcome back to the show, Alan.
My pleasure.
Now, before we dive into this important work that you have prepared for our website, I think we need to comment on the latest events of the past week. There's been a lot happening. There's been a resumption of a conflict in Gaza with Israel bombing Gaza, killing hundreds of people. Unfortunately, we won't have time to really dive into this important question, so we'll deal with that properly next week. However, there's been another event which is, from a world political perspective, more consequential, which is the phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, which took place 2 days ago. And this was an important turning point in the Ukrainian conflict. What came out of this phone call was an agreement between America and Russia to begin a ceasefire, a limited ceasefire in Ukraine, covering energy facilities, attacks on energy facilities for 30 days, as well as a prisoner exchange of 125 prisoners, and the beginning of technical discussions for also the implementation of a ceasefire in the Black Sea, followed by further negotiations this Sunday in Saudi Arabia between America and Russia, with the aim of achieving a full settlement of this war and a peace, essentially, in Ukraine. Now, just to give a bit of background to our readers to this ceasefire agreement, this came after a French proposal of having a ceasefire of the air entirely in Ukraine, which meant that no aerial bombardments or sorties should take place in Ukraine. The Ukrainians, then, following negotiations with the Americans, came up with a unconditional full ceasefire. But Putin made it clear that he would not agree to that, because this would only be to the benefit of Ukraine, which is losing in the battlefield, losing men, losing arms, declining in morale, and without checks to ensure that Ukraine would not use this period to rearm and regroup and prepare for a new battle, which would extend the war. He said they couldn't agree to this, and therefore they've proposed this new deal, which, it seems to me, well, I think this to everyone, mainly benefits the Russians, because the Russians don't carry out regular, daily, let's say, massive attacks against Ukrainian energy facilities. What they do is, with an interval of around 1 to 1.5 months, they carry out massive attacks. And therefore, for them to stop now for a month wouldn't be that much of a change from their previous actions. Whereas they were how do you say, the Ukrainians were attacking Russian energy facilities, which were a certain nuisance, let's put it like that, to Russia. So this is all in Russia's favor, and this is something that the bourgeois can see. In the Financial Times, they interviewed a former director for Russia on the U.S. National Security Council. This was during Trump's first term, and she complained, Putin has not shifted from anything. The U.S. is negotiating with itself all over the place. He wants to win the war. What do you think, Alan? Do you think he wants to win the war?
Who?
Putin.
Putin? Well, if he's in a war, obviously he's in to win, isn't he? He's certainly not in to lose. And he's not losing. The fact of the matter is, and I think that any half-intelligent person must now realize this, Russia is not just winning the war, Russia has won the war. This war, from the standpoint of the Ukrainians, is lost. That's the starting point. You see, we talk about negotiations, yes, but what drives negotiations in a situation like this is first and foremost events on the battlefield. You know, wars are fought and won not around the negotiating table, but on the battlefield. Now, if you just look at the events of the last few days, actually, the last week, it's been quite a dramatic turn in events. For example, this adventure of Zelensky, it was a very foolish adventure, of sending troops into Russian territory, into the Kursk region, which was trumpeted. By the way, it's quite amusing if you read the press coverage, the Western coverage at the time. Yes. I advised our audience to do this, actually. Just read what they said. Oh, they were cock-a-hoop. They were really enthusiastic. This was a great thing, the greatest thing since sliced bread. This was a stroke of genius on Zelensky's part. Look, they've invaded Russia. They've taken the Russians by surprise, which I questioned at the time. I still question it, by the way, whether they were in reality taken by surprise. Yes. But in any case, oh yes, it was going to shock Putin. It was going to cause a reaction against the war, and so on and so forth. Well, not so. There were some people, some intelligent people, that hadn't lost their heads entirely, that pointed out at the time this was a big mistake. Worse than a mistake, it's a catastrophe. Yeah. And it's ended in a catastrophe. What you now see in Kursk is actually, and by the way, there's been a deafening silence about this in the Western media now. They were so cocky about it when it began. Now they're silent about what's actually happening in the Kursk, which is actually, I'll spell it out, read my lips. This, what you see in Kursk at the present time, is the biggest catastrophe, military catastrophe, in the entire history of the last, 3 years of war in the Ukraine. And the loss of life, for a start, on the Ukrainian side, is absolutely appalling. The Ukrainians have been driven out. Now, of course, they probably turn on, as they said at the time of the last offensive. It's a funny thing, the Ukrainian offensive was lost. Well, let me put it in plain English. In a war, battles are not won. People are defeated. They don't like to say this. The Ukrainians have been repeatedly defeated by the Russians. They don't like to use that expression, but it's a fact. And this has been a catastrophic and humiliating defeat, costing, I don't know how many lives. No, they lie. No, but look, both sides don't tell the truth about the casualties. There's no means of knowing how many lives are lost. But certainly, the loss of life, and it's a decisive difference, you see. I mean, Russia, after all, is a big country with a big population. They can afford to take a certain amount of casualties. Ukraine cannot. And the present loss of life in the Ukraine means these losses cannot be replaced. Yes. And that puts the Ukrainian army ultimately in an impossible position. Now, this is decisive. Absolutely decisive. And it will have a big effect on the war in general. Which, the fact that the war is now lost, I think that's understood now by most intelligent people. It's denied, of course, in Europe, but there we are. The Europeans are running around now like chickens with their heads chopped off. The leaders I'm talking about, the politicians, the Macrons and the Starmers and other idiots, which I've never seen such a bunch of incompetent rulers in the Western world. The entire course of my life, and that's quite a long life at the present time. But in any case, they understand nothing, and they're in a state of denial.
Yes.
But certainly the Americans have understood. Or at least let's put it this way: the Trump administration has understood this.
Yeah.
Donald J. Trump understood. You can say what you like about Trump, and many things are said about him. But one thing is, he's not stupid. No, yes. You can accuse him of many things. You can't accuse him of that. Yeah. And he understands this quite well. Vance, his vice president, understands this perfectly well. They all understand that the Ukrainians have lost. When he turned to Zelensky in that infamous incident in the Oval Office and said, look, you haven't got any cards to play. That's absolutely good. Putin's got all the cards, and that's decisive.
Yes.
And I wonder that before we proceed any further in this, one thing strikes me, which many things are incredible to my way of thinking, but the most astonishing thing is this: one would have thought, would one not, after 3 years of terrible bloodshed and suffering, terrible, particularly of the Ukrainian people, the Russians also, but the Ukrainians in particular, are the main victims in this, actually. It's the one thing that continually appalls me in the attitude of people like Starmer and Macron and others, who pretend to be the friends of Ukraine. Oh, yeah, they're friends of the Ukraine. They support the Ukraine. Really? Look, let me tell you something. I mean, with friends like these, the Ukrainian people don't need enemies.
Yeah.
These so-called friends are pushing the Ukrainians to continue a war which they must know cannot be won, and it only leads to further slaughter, further senseless slaughter, and further killing. Now, whatever you think about Donald Trump, he was elected in the States with a promise to end the war in the Ukraine. And I've no doubt whatsoever that he wants to end for certain reasons, different reasons. He wants to end this war. So he's talking to the Russians. What a terrible crime.
Mm-hmm. Yes, a lot of people are
What a terrible crime. He's actually... By the way, Biden never talked to the Russians for the last 3 years. It must be unprecedented in the history of world diplomacy that for a period of 3 years, between the two major superpowers and the two major nuclear powers, moreover, there's been absolutely no communication whatever. This is dangerous.
Yeah.
Some people talk, oh no, you could have a third world war. Donald Trump is coming, it means a third world war. No such thing. On the contrary, if there was ever a danger of a third world war, and by the way, it did come, I think we came perilously close to it, in the latter stages of the Biden regime, because there was no communication between the two major nuclear powers, none whatever. That's dangerous in and of itself. Yeah. That was never the case, by the way, even in the worst period of the Cold War, where there were very tense and very bitter relations, hostility between the Americans and the Russians. There was never a period where there was not some kind of negotiations or contacts taking place at some level. Yeah. Now there's none. Even the embassies were closed down. Astonishing. Now Donald Trump says, and from any point of view, it's at least rational. The man wants to talk to Putin, talk to the Russians at least, re-establish some kind of normal diplomatic relationship and talk about it and negotiate. Oh, no. This is portrayed as a betrayal by people, idiots, imbeciles, like Starmer. I'm ashamed to say that he's our British Prime Minister. I don't know for how long. Not long, I hope. Yeah. And Macron, that French idiot, that French crowing cockerel in Paris, portray this. And of course, the Ukrainians, this is a betrayal. Why, I ask myself, is it wrong, is it a betrayal for Americans and Russians to talk together and try to find some kind of a way out of this mess? And by the way, it's perfectly clear, and that's the real meaning of these phone conversations, especially the last one, which you mentioned. So there are only two nations which can stop this war. And it's not Paris, and it's not London, and it's certainly not Kiev, where they're determined to continue the war, by the way, although it's disastrous for the Ukrainian people above all. The only two nations which are capable of halting this bloodshed is precisely Russia and the United States. And therefore, from that point of view, the negotiations obviously are necessary and dare I say, productive.
Yes, I mean, just following on from what you just said, it's interesting because we've been told that this is a unilateral, unprovoked war by Russia against Ukraine. And you might wonder, if it was so, how can it be that peace negotiations are taking place between the United States and Russia? how can well, that would imply that that's not quite the case.
Well, it isn't the case, as a matter of fact. And I mean, look, in any war, they say that the first casualty of war is the truth. And that's true of any war. And in any war, you get a colossal barrage of propaganda, the fog of propaganda, fog of all kinds of lies and distortion. You expect that. But, you know, I've never seen in my life such an appalling level of misinformation, of lies, constant stream of lies. Yeah. By the way, they're trapped now. It's quite amusing if you've got a sense of humor. You watch these programs on television now. What's the news? See how they report all these developments. These guys have told so many lies for the last 3 years. They're finding it difficult now to retreat and to tell the truth.
Themselves up.
Now they're in trouble.
Yeah.
How do you explain? For 3 years, we were told that the Ukrainians were advancing, the Ukrainians were defeating the Russians.
Russia was running out of missiles.
The Russians. I remember distinctly about 2 years ago, at the time of the Battle of Bakhmut, it was, that the Russians they'd run out of so many things. They were now fighting with shovels. Well, all I can say is they must have some very effective shovels.
In fact, they do have some very effective shovels.
Yeah, they do. So that's another matter. It's a fact that they do use sharp struggles as weapons of hand-to-hand fighting. But that's a separate question. The Russians are not running short of ammunition or bayonets or...
To the contrary.
Or shovels, if it comes to that.
In fact, we were told that Russia is running out of missiles. And Russia is running out of tanks. And Russia is running out of everything. Yes. However, as you pointed out in the beginning of the war, I remember you wrote an article in April 2002, and you wrote, Russia has the bigger population and bigger industrial base, and therefore that is bound to be the decisive question in the longer term. And that is in fact what happened. That while Russia could keep mobilizing, the Ukrainians are running out of men.
Yes.
While Russia mobilized the whole of the economy, and the military industry, which is primarily state-owned, the West actually fell behind. So not only did the Russians not run out of missiles, but Western missiles are now running low on stocks, whereas Russia could outproduce them in tanks, in artillery, in missiles, in planes, drones.
Yes, it's an actual fact. All the Western countries, starting with the United States, by the way, now find that their arsenals are seriously depleted in every respect, in terms of ammunition, tanks, missiles, you name it. Because they've shipped them all to the Ukraine. The British Army is in a lamentable state. How the hell Starmer can have the brazen cheek to say, oh, we can send whatever it is, 30,000 troops to fight in the Ukraine? They cannot. That's a straight lie. I think some British officers have been quite annoyed about this, but army officers, even papers like the Daily Telegraph, which is bitterly hostile to Russia and in favor of the Ukraine, have stated, Starmer, you're prepared to send British troops to the Ukraine. You're not prepared to give them the proper arms and equipment. So you're putting them in harm's way. That's the truth. The British Army is in a lamentable state. That's perfectly correct. Why? Because they've shipped all their weapons and stuff to the Ukraine for the last 3 years. Same goes for all these countries. They're all in the same. The Russians, on the other hand, are not short of anything because they're... By the way, one lie which they constantly repeat, oh yes, Russia's a war economy. Russia's not a war economy at all. They've got a perfectly normal economy, perfectly normal industries. All of them are producing commodities the same as any other time. The Russian economy, even the World Bank admits this, the IMF admits this, was, I think they expanded last year by almost 5%, which is colossal compared to the miserable figures in Britain is 0% and so on and so forth. Well, yeah, they're producing all kinds of things and arms as well. on top of that.
Yes.
That's because they got a far more efficient industry than, industry in Britain has been destroyed by Thatcher and other Tory governments years ago. But in any case, they are short of weapons. That's perfectly true. The Russians are not. That's nonsense. And therefore, the Russians are in. The idea that Russia's about to run out of, that's the other argument. Oh no, if only we could hang on for a little bit, a few months, Russia's going to run out of this and run out of. Russia's not going to run out of anything anytime soon. They can continue for quite some time. Ukraine, of course, cannot. The Ukraine is entirely dependent and has been dependent for some time for its arms, weapons, and money entirely on the West, on America, on Europe, and so on.
Yes, the West provides the arms, the intelligence, even the coordination.
Yes.
Ukraine provides the men.
Yes.
There is unfortunately, there wasn't enough time to prepare for today, but there is a damning report by a Russian liberal, a pro-Ukrainian Russian, who went to Ukraine and traveled for 2 months in the fronts. And it is horrifying. The picture that he paints, we want to come do that in a proper way, but do it justice next week, hopefully. But what he explains is a situation where there's a terror, a fear of death, fear of everyone knows that you go to the army, it's a one-way ticket to death. There's a hatred against the ruling class and the regime, which is basically just throwing the generation after generation into a meat grinder. The most feared word in the Ukraine now is not Russia, which was the case in the beginning of the war, but is the TCC, which is the mobilization forces, the people who go around the cities, literally catch young men and bust them off. And therefore, the second most popular word in Ukraine today is bussification, which is what they call this thing. They talk about it as a slave market, where brigades come up and look at all of these poor young men sitting there in the waiting rooms, just directly snatched off the streets, and pick out the ones that look the strongest to go to the better brigades. The other ones are thrown in as cannon fodder. And yes, it is a Western proxy war fought with the blood of the Ukrainian nation.
Well, it's not even that. It's actually. See, to go back to your original statement, which we didn't deal with, this war was deliberately provoked. Let's be clear about it. Not by the Russians, not by Putin. That's not true. It was deliberately provoked by the Americans and by Biden in particular and by NATO. The expansion of NATO, by the way, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the West promised time after time, they pledged themselves publicly, it's on the public record, it's not a secret, that the NATO would not advance one step beyond Germany. What's happened since then? They've steadily advanced Poland, the Balkan states, the Baltic states, and so on and so forth, right up Romania, right up to the border of the Soviet Union. And they were warned about this from the Russians repeatedly. And the Russians also warned them, look, so far and no further, and the Ukraine, under no circumstances will Ukraine be allowed to join NATO. Because that's too much to put NATO bases, and by the way, potentially with nuclear weapons, right next door to Russia in Ukraine. That was too much. They were warned. But they persisted in this, and that's precisely what led, and other factors as well. Then you had, of course, the Maidan coup d'etat, which was a movement entirely sponsored by the West, by the Americans in particular, which overthrew the existing government and installed a pro-American, pro-Western government, which immediately proceeded to resort to the most scandalous, oppressive measures against the Russian-speaking people in the Ukraine, which, by the way, account for a very large minority, 25%, maybe as much as a third, are Russian speakers, had their rights taken away, and were subject to the most brutal oppression, and which forced them to a position where they had to defend themselves. And that led to a chain of events which inevitably culminated eventually in the Russian intervention and the present war. So that was brought about deliberately by the West. And what was the intention? The intention was to use the Ukraine, cynically to use the Ukrainian people, in order to weaken, to create a war with Russia, in which Russia would be defeated and weakened. That was the whole purpose of it. By the way, they were so enthusiastic, the Western leaders, most of them were quite exuberant about all this. They were quite cocky about it. They were sure that with the NATO's weapons and money and arms and all the rest of it, that they would soon defeat the Russians, and they would reduce the Russians to a subjugated nation. Some of them even spoke about the breakup of Russia into separate units and so on. In other words, to reduce Russia to a colony. That was the serious intention of these people. Sanctions also as well.
Joe Biden talked about regime change.
Of course. The whole purpose of it was to bring down Putin, create regime change in Moscow, which would bring about a pro-Western government and the subjugation of Russia to the West. Simple as that. Yeah, but it didn't turn out like that. All these clever plans have just blown up in their faces because Russia was not defeated. They were not defeated by sanctions. And by the way, the sanctions were absolutely incredible, which were inflicted on the Russia to destroy the Russian economy or weaken it. Instead of that, the Russian economy has survived and has actually thrived on the basis of creating their own industries and investing the money which previously was invested in the West is now being invested in Russia, creating an enormous boom in production. Now, all of this, of course, means that the whole plan, the whole so-called Project Ukraine, has ended in tears, ended in utter shipwreck. And now, of course, they're scrambling to try to find a way out of this mess. But, of course, the mess gets bigger every day. And every day that they prolong this war, of course, the result will be worse. Worse for the Ukraine, worse for Europe, worse for the entire world, except for Russia, of course, which will gain.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned before that the Biden administration had cut all communications, almost all communications with the Russians. And instead, what we see in the readout from the phone call between Trump and Putin a few days ago, in the American readout, it says, the two leaders agreed that a future with an improved bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia has huge upside. This includes enormous economic deals and geopolitical stability when peace has been achieved. Now, this is a significant change from a point of view, from the situation where the United States and Russia have no communications and sanctions. There's a sanction regime on Russia. To this, and what do you think this reflects in terms of world relations?
Well, potentially it reflects a very great deal. I mean, to begin with, you see, well, from the standpoint of Donald Trump, from the standpoint of America, actually, American interests, this administration and the USA itself is interested, should be interested, in arriving at least at a reasonable relationship with the Russians. How far this will go, I don't know. I think you might be a little bit previous in your predictions. Admittedly, they're talking about the re-establishment of commercial relations, possibly the withdrawal of sanctions, and so on. If that were to be the case, by the way, it would benefit the world economy. It would benefit America. The renewal of trade in Russian oil and gas alone would mean a lowering of energy prices, which, as you know, is one of the main causes of inflation in the West at the present time. That's true. Whether or not that's going to happen, that's unclear to me. It's unclear to me how far these negotiations are going to go, because for a start, the Europeans are opposed to these negotiations. They're trying to sabotage them.
Yes. That's
the meaning of Starmer's policy and Macron's policy, which is quite insane, as a matter of fact. But they will not prevent a Russian victory, but they will prolong this war as much as possible. Why? For a very simple reason. They want to ensure that America maintains the security arrangement which it's had with Europe since the end of the Second World War. That's to say that the Americans act as a kind of shield, a nuclear shield, against possible war with Russia, of course, evidently, in the first instance. Now, this is now in doubt. I've no doubt whatever that Trump would like to change this. He'd like to get out of Europe. Europe no longer occupies the same important place as it once did in American strategic interests. That's perfectly true. Now, the only thing is that it may be logical, but at the same time, there are many forces which militate against that. For a start, the Ukrainians will do their best. Zelensky is doing his best to sabotage this, sabotage the negotiations, and continue the war. In this madness, it is madness because it will mean ultimately the destruction of the Ukraine. He's being supported by the Europeans, by Starmer and Macron in particular, who are pushing the Ukraine. Let's call a spade a shovel. They're pushing for their own cynical reasons. They're pushing the Ukrainians into the abyss.
Yeah,
they're pushing it in a direction which, if it continues like this, it will potentially lead to the complete and utter destruction of the Ukraine as a nation. If they were able to reach some kind of a deal with the Russians now, at least something could be salvaged. Although the Ukraine would lose part of its territory. There's no two ways about that because they've lost the war. In a war, as you know, I mean, it's a fact. It's maybe a regrettable fact, but it's a fact nonetheless. In a war, it's the victors which impose their terms. And the defeated party must accept whatever terms they offer. Simple as that. But if they don't reach a deal and they don't reach some kind of an agreement, then all that will happen is that the war will continue. The Ukrainians will suffer dreadful losses, horrific losses, and ultimately it will lead to the destruction of the Ukraine as a country altogether, which is not a good result from anybody's point of view.
No. You talk about Europe. The Europeans, as you say, are terrified of what's happening here. They would lose the American support and they would lose their standing in world politics. They would be reduced to third-rate, fourth-rate powers, depending on their sides. And therefore, we see this drive towards militarism, rearmament. The German parliament, very undemocratically, has voted through the lifting of the debt ceiling, allowing for a 400 billion euro investment in infrastructure and an unlimited investment, but which is probably going to be around 500 billion euros in defense spending. The EU has come out with a plan to create an 800 billion euro defense fund, although we're not going to go into that, but that's probably going to fall apart. But country after country is now calling for a raising of the defense spending to at least 3% of GDP. NATO has been out, Mark Rutte has been out saying you need to raise it to at least 3, maybe even 5%. And you have, as you said, our Starmer here in Britain, launching the Coalition of the Willing, which incidentally is the name of the coalition that went into Iraq.
It's a very unfortunate name.
Didn't end well.
Yes.
And he had this Zoom meeting, which no one knows who actually participated. A series of like-minded countries. Yes. And they're now talking about an operational phase of sending troops to Ukraine. Of course, they want the Americans to guarantee their security. In essence, they want the Americans to do it for them. But all of this is a part of this militarization. And one thing is whether they will succeed in this or not. But the other question is the economic impact that this is going to have. Already, in Britain, the Labour Party has announced £5 billion worth of cuts, another approximately the same amount to be announced in the next period. These 5 billion are primarily aimed at disabled people and benefit receivers, people on universal credit. And there's going to be blanket cuts of up to 7% in all of the different departments. This barely covers the debt servicing costs, which are increasing massively. The interest rates are going up. Last December, Britain paid almost £9 billion in debt servicing alone. And in the middle of all of this, they want to raise their defense spending. Now, just to give an example, this last year, defense spending in Britain was 58.8 billion. They want to raise this to 2.5%. It was around 2.3%. They want to raise it to 2.5%. That would mean another 5 billion, a bit more than 5 billion pounds spent. That's just 1.5%. But they want to raise it a further 5% to 3% of GDP by 2030. So we are talking tens of billions of pounds extra spent every year on military. While the economy is in recession and declining, while the debt servicing costs are rising, and they are attacking benefits, disabled people, working people, ordinary people, welfare in general. That's a nightmare. That's a recipe for crisis. What's your take on this issue?
Well, I'm very fond of Peter Sellers. He was very, very, very good, a funny actor when he was alive. And one of his early films is called The Mouse That Roared. Have you seen that film?
No.
I recommend it. It's very good. The Mouse That Roared.
Yeah.
I think you find it quite amusing. And this situation reminds me of that. The Europe is the mouse that roars, a mouse that tries to roar. And there's nothing more ridiculous than that. No spectacle more ridiculous. There's nothing more ridiculous than this scramble of the Europeans, the bragging and the boasting and talking about arms and interventions and sending peacekeepers to the Ukraine. Peacekeepers to the Ukraine? What are you talking about? Look, for a start, the Russians have said, Putin has said, he said it repeatedly, we will not accept any NATO troops or any foreign troops from NATO, from Europe, and so on, in Ukraine. And if they're sent, we will treat them as combatants and we will liquidate them, which they will.
Yeah.
So that's the first point. Secondly, of course, the Starmer and Macron know this. That's why they've raised it. They want to get the Americans, that's the whole purpose of it, to get the Americans involved in the war again, something which Donald Trump is vigorously resisting and he will not accept. The whole basis of his policy is to get out of the Ukraine, which is a sensible thing to do. And if the Europeans had any sense, they'd follow his lead. But there we are. They haven't got far from doing that. They want to pull the Americans in, and the idea is send this force. How many? 20,000, 30,000,
30,000.
30,000. Well, even if they don't even have 30,000. That's bullshit. But in any case, even if they had 30,000 troops, the Russians have got an army of approaching 1 million now. What difference would that make? 30,000 is nothing. And they would instantly be liquidated, but they'd come back in body bags, as simple as that. Just imagine the effect that would have. Therefore, they would send these troops in, the troops would get shot to bits, surrounded, in difficulties. Then they'd immediately phone the Americans and demand that the Americans should save them. That's the whole purpose of it.
Yes.
Which would mean, by the way, what? An open military clash between the United States and Russia, which, by the way, as Biden himself pointed out, would mean World War III. Now, just imagine the lunacy of this policy. Absolute lunacy. Because the Americans are wise to it. They're not stupid. And they say, no. There ain't going to be no guarantee from us. You go into the Ukraine, that's your business, you're on your own.
Yeah.
Which why they won't go in, by the way. Simple as that. It's just bluff. It's just stupid bluff on their part. But they turn on, in order to impress the Americans, because Trump has said it makes sense, he said, in effect, look, we have supported you people long enough. It's cost us a lot of money, which it has. It is costing us a lot of money, which it is. They got huge debts, by the way, in the States. Also, it's not easy for them also. And we've had enough. Therefore, we're going to pull out eventually. You better start raising the money to pay for your own defense. That's at the bottom. So now they're scurrying around now. And what do they propose? Well, it's not a new policy. It was invented a long time ago by a man called Hermann Goering. You've heard of Hermann Goering? Hitler's Minister for War, Minister of Defense, whatever he was. And he said the following, defending rearmament of Germany. He said, the guns will make us great. Butter will only make us fat. Guns before butter.
That's what these guys are saying.
Well, he would know about being fat because he was rather fat himself, actually. And he never went short of butter in his life or anything else if it came to that. Guns before butter. That's the same old policy that they're plugging now. The problem, and the question is, where is this money going to come from? You might suggest taxing the rich. Oh, no question of that. This is a Labour government. Don't tax the rich. Good heavens above. No. Tax the most, hit the most vulnerable. Cut the money for the most vulnerable, the sick, the disabled, and so on and so forth. They want to raise $5 billion. Do you know how much money Britain has sent to the Ukraine in the last 3 years? Or 2 years, I think it is. Isn't it 12 million, I think?
12 billion, yeah.
12 billion. 12 billion pounds have been gone. So let's get this straight. Now, get your head around this. There's no money for the poor. There's no money for hospitals. There's no money for schools. But there's plenty of money to send to the Ukraine.
In fact, Keir Starmer said we're going to send 3 billion for as long as it takes.
There we are. For as long as it takes. That's nice, isn't it? That's that. And therefore, it's the poor people in Britain and the sick and the disabled and the old age pensioners and the hospitals and the doctors and so on that's going to pay for sending this money. By the way, this money that's sent to the Ukraine, how much money has been sent already? The Americans have sent billions and billions and billions have been sent. What's happened to this money? Trump is now asking, what have you done with this money? Good question. Nobody ever asked that question before. Why not, I wonder? Nobody's ever asked. You know, Zelensky actually had the bare cheek to actually admit, he was stupid enough to admit, he said, well, actually, he said, there's 100 billion that I can't account for. Now, just get your head around 100 billion. You'd think he's talking about 100 pence.
Yeah.
No. There's $100 billion, which you've sent us very kindly for the war, which I do not watch. I can't account for it.
Yeah.
Well, I can account for it. I'll tell you now where it is. You'll find it tucked away nicely in all kinds of Caribbean, shady Caribbean bank accounts. It's gone into the pockets of the corrupt Ukrainian ruling clique, the oligarchs, and Zelensky himself and his clique. You can be sure of it.
Yeah.
And yet, he's got the brazen cheek. Oh, no, we want more, even more. We want even more billions from you. And Starmer and Macron are sufficiently stupid or arrogant or whatever, or insane, to accept this. They want to saddle the British people, the French people, the European people with colossal debts incurred in order to provide new toys for the generals to play with, and also, of course, for the Ukrainian oligarchs to build nice mansions by the seaside in the Caribbean. Now, that's the fact. But who's saying this? Now, that's the thing that gets me. Who's saying this? Nobody is telling the British people the truth. Nobody's mentioning these facts. And yet they are facts. They cannot be denied. No. Zelensky's good. Zelensky's a hero. Zelensky's this. Zelensky is both a clown and a monster at the same time. And by the way, his policy, deliberate policy, is to engineer a direct clash military between America and Russia, which means the Third World War. For goodness sake, wake up, British people, wake up and understand what's happening. French people, wake up. European people, German people, wake up and understand what's happening. But no, there's a conspiracy on the part of the political establishment, including the so-called left. Good heavens, look, the German Greens. This horrible woman, Baerbock, whatever her name is. A Green minister. One of the worst warmongers. The Greens in Germany used to organize demonstrations against armaments and wars. Not anymore. They're banging the drum now all the time in favor of war. War with Russia, if you please. Now, come on. Somebody is going to tell the truth. If nobody else will tell the truth, we will tell the truth to the British people and the American people and the German people. Now, in fairness to Trump is no hero, but look at his monstrous conduct in relation to Gaza. I don't wish to defend Donald Trump, who is a reactionary bourgeois politician. But nevertheless, in what he says about Ukraine is correct. The reason he's saying it is that, and he's quite right, this war is not my war. It's not America's war. It's Biden's war. They deliberately engineered this war, and it's nothing to do with us, and it's not in our interest. That's a fact. And the sooner it's ended in disaster, it would inevitably have ended in disaster. I said it would end in disaster. Trump said, if I'd have been in charge, the war wouldn't have taken place. Well, I don't know whether that's true or false. It may well be true, by the way, because he doesn't have quite the same ideas about foreign wars that Biden has. But in any case, he wants out. He wants out. His one mistake, I think, is that his one mistake, he should have said it straightforwardly to Zelensky right at the beginning, look, we've had it with you. We spent enough money, we wasted enough money on this war, we're out. Do what you like. That would have solved a lot of problems. Unfortunately, he allowed himself to be maneuvered into this business of negotiations and so on, which has complicated things somewhat. I don't think they'll lead anywhere, by the way, the negotiations. I'm sure they will not, because Zelensky is determined to sabotage them, like this so-called ceasefire, which the Ukrainians are already sabotaging, of course. They have no interest. Zelensky's not interested in a ceasefire of any sort. He wants to continue the war. Why? Because his political survival depends upon it. Like he's got that in common with Netanyahu, as a matter of fact. They're similar characters, pursuing a similar catastrophic policy. But there we are. We leave that to one side.
Yes, there's a lot more to dive into, and we need to get you back to deepen these analyses. But I think we should move on to the more broader questions, because we have the entrance of Donald Trump on the scene has completely changed the world situation. It's had a direct impact in every country in the world. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we see a series of major crises erupting, all of which have been affected by his presidency. And at the same time, there is a lot of discussion out there. There's a lot of dust being thrown in people's eyes. There's a lot of confusion. And there's a lot of people who genuinely want to understand what's happening. What does all of this actually mean? Because if we look at the previous period, the previous epoch of world history with the post-war period, you see nothing like this phenomenon. Nothing that resembles what we stand in front of today. And I think this is the important thing to grapple with, and this is what your article is about that we will publish tomorrow. Now, the first question I think we should answer. There is a persistent claim that Donald Trump, we see him issuing presidential decrees. We see him bending or even ignoring the law in certain areas. And there is this idea that the rise of Donald Trump is a step back for democracy. Donald Trump is undermining democracy. We had a democratic rights before that we don't have anymore. What do you think of these claims?
What do I think? Well, I think that there's a lot of hysteria being generated since the election of Trump, even before. All kinds of dire black warnings about the threat to democracy, fascism, I don't know what. Now, and even many people on the left have been affected by this, actually. And I don't know, Trump is presented as a source of all our evils, and like some kind of devil that's suddenly appeared by black magic or something like that. And by black magic, he seems to have got control of the United States of America. But you see, this doesn't answer. These are so-called explanations, explanations which explain nothing. It's just hot air, really. Now, the celebrated philosopher Spinoza, marvelous, profound philosopher, he once said that our task, the task of philosophy, is to neither weep nor to laugh, but to understand. Now let's set aside all the hysteria and all the noise and the din and the propaganda for a moment, and try to reflect, try to think with a cool head and answer the question, how does one explain? How can you explain the phenomenon of Donald Trump? Now, first of all, if he's responsible for all the evils which are being stated, they're all down to him. The wars, the crises, and the instability and so on. Now, that, really speaking, it's not possible for one person, one individual to do these things. No matter how clever he is, no matter how powerful he is and so on. No, it's just simply not possible. If it is true, and it is partly true, it is true what you say, that he certainly acted in a way which has led to these crises, but that can't be just because of him. It must be something that's inherent in the objective situation itself. And it is, in point of fact. Let me take one simple fact. You see, for a long period, for at least since the fall of the Soviet Union, you had the phenomenon known as globalization, which was really an intensification of international trade, of the world division of labor, if you like. And that served a purpose because one of the contradictions which prevents the development of capitalism is the limitations of the national market. And therefore, by developing, Marx explains this in the third volume of Capital, that one of the ways in which they get around, for example, the falling rate of profit is to develop world trade. And this has been done in a colossal, unprecedented way for the last at least three or four decades. Yes, but this, of course, has now reached its limits. I won't go into the details. It's a separate discussion. It's reached its limits and it's turning into its opposite. All the factors that made for the economic growth of the last period have now turned into their opposite. And instead of increasing world trade, instead of economic collaboration and the rest of it, you've got economic nationalism. Every bourgeois, every capitalist class is now defending its own interests against all others. And that's more true of the United States than anywhere else. And Donald Trump is like he's the kind of embodiment of this when he puts forward the idea, make America great again, To make America great, the rest of the world. America first, he says. Well, if America's first, the rest of the world must be last, as they've just found out to their cost, with the introduction of tariffs and so on and so forth, which, of course, will just aggravate the crisis. There's no two ways about that. But there's that side to him, but there are other sides to Donald Trump. Now, look, what is astonishing is this. I can't remember any election in which, and I'm going back to the first time he was elected, now before, what was it, 2016? 16, yeah. Such a colossal campaign against a particular individual to stop him from taking office. For example, he had no support whatsoever in the mass media, which is very powerful.
Yeah.
The press, the TV, they were all against him, and in the most belligerent way, the most horrific way. And yet he won, despite that fact. And now you've got a repeat performance. I mean, the amount of not just hostile propaganda, but you get actual court cases, for example. I think there was over 100 court cases of his administration. And at least four of them were directed against him personally, intended to send the man to jail. Once he was safely behind bars, he couldn't stand as president. I mean, this is a blatant effort. That's a blatant attempt to thwart democracy, if you like, to stop a candidate from standing. By the way, this business of democracy, they're all in favor of democracy, these so-called liberal Democrats.
Yeah.
They're all in favor of, I tell you what they're in favor of. They're in favor of elections as long as their candidate wins.
Yeah.
If that's not the case, if it's a candidate they don't approve of, then they're not in favor of it. I'll prove it now. Vance stated this recently. J.B. Vance denounced it. This absolute scandal that's taking place in Romania. Because they didn't like this Georgescu as a candidate they didn't approve of. Well, I don't necessarily agree with everything that Georgescu stands for or says. That's beside the point. He's got a right to stand, same as anybody else. They didn't. He got elected, and what did they do? They cancelled the election. Can you imagine it?
And then they arrested him for the second time.
That's right. Then they've arrested him, and they want to stop him again. They want to stop him from standing as an election again. Now, if this is not a blatant violation of elementary democratic rights, I don't know what is. And that's the way these so-called liberals conduct themselves. And they've got the brazen cheek then to accuse Trump of being a threat to democracy. A fascist, in fact. Now, look, they said this before he was elected last time. He was elected in 2016, okay. Now, see, the word fascism is used here as an insult. You might just as well call him a son of a bitch or anything else, any other nasty epithet. It's not used as a scientific expression. Now, Marxism is a science. And we Marxists, like any other scientists, we have our own scientific terminology. Fascism is a very precise thing which we define as a specific form of reaction which is based on what? It's a mass movement of the petty bourgeoisie and the lumpen proletariat which is used as a battering ram to smash the working class movement, to smash the trade unions, to illegalize communist and socialist parties and liberal parties also, to destroy democracy, yes, and to institute what? A totalitarian fascist state, which is a strong state, with the secret police, the Gestapo, the concentration camps, and all the rest of it. Okay, now, look, Trump was elected in 2016. Is there anything that he did which bears the slightest resemblance to any of these things? Did he illegalize the trade unions? He did not. Did he take away the right to strike and demonstrate? He did not. Did he illegalize any party? He did not. He didn't even remove people as candidates, which they tried to do against him. It's just a straight lie. No, actually, if you're gonna, if Donald Trump has got any kind of ideology, which is dubious that he does, but that if he does have, then he doesn't base himself on Hitler and Mussolini. He bases himself on Roosevelt. Yeah, not F.D. Roosevelt, not Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the 1930s, who invented was responsible for the New Deal, but Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt as he was known, before the First World War. That's his model. Free market capitalism, no taxes or low taxes, and the state, far from a strong state, Trump is not in favor of a strong state. He's in favor of the least possible state intervention, right?
Yeah.
And if possible, I think he would like no state at all. But there we are. That's another matter. But certainly, it's nothing. Whatever else it might be, it's nothing in common with fascism. Another argument that sometimes is heard on the left: "Oh, he's a Bonapartist." Well, Bonapartism is not quite fascism, but it's ruled by the sword. Basically, all Bonapartism ultimately rests upon the police, the army, and it's the strong state, you know, and ruled by the sword, a military dictatorship, if you like. Okay. Now, again, whatever else you say about Donald Trump, that's not it. It's not it. Yeah. You might say, well, there's some elements of Bonapartism. That may be the case. I won't argue, but that's kind of splitting hairs, really. I mean, it's possible to find a rough analogy of the Bonapartism in many regimes, like even in Britain under Tony Blair. You had a situation where political power, in effect, passed from Parliament, the British Parliament, the mother of all parliaments. It passed to the cabinet first, then from the cabinet to a tiny clique of unelected officials, spin doctors, cronies of Blair, and so on.
Yeah.
That resembles a kind of parliamentary Bonapartism, yeah, but it's got elements of, yeah, but elements of a phenomenon is not the phenomenon itself. And therefore I think this comparison is more misleading than anything else. It doesn't explain anything. You can say, well, Donald Trump is like this and Donald Trump is like that. I'll tell you what Donald Trump is like. Donald Trump is like Donald Trump. He's I think he's quite a unique phenomenon. But the question which has to be answered is this, which is never posed. How on earth could he defeat all the combined power of the state? Yes. The combined power of the media, of the establishment, of all the newspapers were against him, and all the rest, yet again, accused of all sorts of things. They tried to put him in jail. You know, convicted felon, remember? Convicted. How can you have a convicted felon as a president? Well, you can, evidently, because he was elected. Elected, furthermore, by a thumping majority, which I didn't expect. I thought he might win the election. I never thought he'd win all of the swing states and win the majority of the popular vote. I didn't think that. Now, but the question must be answered is why? I'll tell you why. And this is something which none of these idiots, the spin doctors, the political experts, and so on, they're blind to this. There is a crisis of the capitalist system everywhere. There's a tax upon living standards. In America, by the way, there's been falling living standards now for decades.
Yeah.
Okay. In many American cities, there are areas which are like third world countries. Appalling areas of deprivation, poverty, and so on and so forth. Okay. And yet, and side by side with the colossal, obscene wealth of the rich, the fat cats, and there's a hatred of the rich, and beneath the surface, in all countries, including America, there is a seething anger, discontent, and above all, I would say frustration, an anger against the rich, an anger against all this injustice and so on and so forth, a burning desire for a change, okay? A hatred of the existing regime and the state and the politicians and the existing parties and so on and so forth, which lacks an expression.
Yeah.
Now, let's come to the point. If the left, if there was such a thing as a genuine left in America, they would undoubtedly be growing now hand over fist, rapidly. I'll prove it. Bernie Sanders came from nowhere a few years back and had huge meetings and so on and so forth when he spoke left and put forth some very radical sounding ideas.
He spoke about a political revolution against the billionaire class.
That's right. And he did, and he got a response. In fact, Trump, it's not generally realized, but Trump actually said on one occasion that he said, I've taken some ideas from Bernie Sanders and used them myself. Trump mentions the working class many times. Nobody else did, by the way, or very few people did. Maybe Bernie Sanders, but he was a relatively small phenomenon. Trump was big time.
Trump put it on the agenda.
Trump put the working class firmly on the agenda. Now this, in other words, he gave expression. He gave an expression. He's quite skillful. He's a demagogue, but he's skillful. He gave expression to this enormous this rage that exists among millions of people, and that was expressed in this election. That's what none of these people are prepared to recognize. What that election result showed was the colossal discontent with the American people. Now, papers like the disgusting papers, so-called liberal papers like The Guardian in Britain, tried to present, he said, what's the reason? Well, the reason is, what they basically say, the American electors are at fault. It's America's fault. They elected this man because they're organically, in effect, they're organically racist and reactionaries.
Yeah.
And yes, they're prone towards fascism. That's what it boils down to. They're weird. That's what the term was used by an article, a disgusting article, a stupid article in the Guardian. It was a weird result, yes, because the American people are weird. Now, it's the same American people that voted in the past for Obama and for other bourgeois politicians.
Yeah.
Were they weird then? When they voted for Clinton or Obama or any of the others? No. Suddenly they become weird. Now this is just stupidity. Like I say, these are explanations which explain nothing except the miserable prejudices of the so-called liberals, who, by the way, they're not liberals at all. They're complete reactionaries, absolute reactionaries of the worst kind.
Yes, I mean, if we talk about attacks against democratic rights, I don't think anyone has attacked democratic rights more than liberals have. It's kind of like the world upside down. It's like 1984. Every word you hear is the opposite. When they talk about peacekeepers, they're talking about an attack on Russia. And
the Ministry of Peace.
Exactly. And the Ministry of Truth. And, they talk about democracy. Yeah. In reality, they mean our democracy, our rules, again, to quote 1980, no, was it Animal Farm? Orwell says, we're all equal, but some of us are more equal than others. All our votes count, but some of our votes count for more than others.
Yes.
Of course, this doesn't mean that Trump is the savior of the working class.
Not at all.
But it does explain the hatred that the working class has for the establishment.
Yes.
And now you mentioned the left. Bernie Sanders, his latest exploits is campaigning in defense of the Constitution, in defense of the American Congress, which is ruled by reactionaries, which is a bunch of reactionaries, Republicans as well as Democrats, against Trump's, let's say, fascism, basically. We saw the same thing in Britain with Corbyn, a massive surge around Corbyn.
Yes.
And as you say, the fact that these guys abandoned the stage, it was open for other forces to come to the fore. Now, you hear again from the left that these are far right forces. We talked about this in this program a couple of weeks ago. If we look at the program of reform in Britain, for example, which is an organization that tries to emulate Trumpism in Britain, it actually talks about the nationalization of the utilities. Now, by nationalization, they mean 50% state ownership, 50% pensions, buying up the water companies, the electricity companies, and so on. But that actually puts them to the left of the Labour Party, and it puts them to the left of the Tory Party. But again, here what we see is a surge of anti-establishment hatred against the working class, which is not finding an outlet amongst the left. What do you think about this idea that calling it Bonapartism, in effect, is a way of supporting the old ruling class, is a way of saying that, no, actually, the old liberal ruling class was more progressive somehow. Somehow this is the main. I mean, I know that some of the lefts in Britain are now saying, vote anyone but reform. That anyone includes the Tories, the present Labour Party leadership, and everyone else, but just not reform. What do you think the left should do in such a situation? What do you think communists should do in such a situation?
The best thing the so-called left can do is to go home and hide under the bed and pretend that they don't exist. Look, I mean, let's call a spade a shovel. Since the crisis of 2008, the capitalist system on a world scale has been in the deepest crisis in its history. It has, and actually, the conditions for socialist revolution, I'll choose my words carefully, have existed. The objective conditions have existed ever since that time. There was a colossal movement to the left, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
For example, it manifested in different countries. For example, not just Bernie Sanders in the States, but you had Tsipras in Greece, Syriza. You had Podemos in Spain. And above all, you had Jeremy Corbyn in Britain. Now, in every single one of those cases, these lefts, so-called lefts, had a chance. Tsipras, for example, had the whole of the Greek nation, never mind about the working class, even the middle class, even people that voted for the right wing in the past, supported him in his struggle against Brussels, against the attempt to impose austerity on the Greek people. Yes. And he could have led an insurrection, in effect, against Brussels, which could have sparked off a movement throughout Europe. He did not. In the moment of truth, he capitulated, and the whole thing was destroyed. Podemos in Spain, I mean, Pablo Iglesias starts with a very left rhetoric, got tremendous support. Then he becomes respectable, joins the Socialist Party in a coalition with the predictable results. And in Britain, that's the most criminal, the most tragic result. Corbyn came from nowhere, same as Sanders came from nowhere, and was propelled into the leadership of the Labour Party on the basis of what? Of a colossal shift to the left. Now, he didn't create that mood. He didn't create that movement. But he acted as a point of reference. That's what was needed.
Yeah.
Like Archimedes, give me a point to stand and I will move the universe. Well, it's the same in politics. There was a colossal mood in favour of a swing to the left. I think 500,000 people joined the Labour Party.
Yes.
in huge numbers, in droves. Now, if Corbyn would have done the same as Trump in the States, and I've used Trump as an example, although he's a reactionary politician, but at least he's got guts. Dare I say he's got a pair of balls, but there we are. I'm old-fashioned. You will excuse me. He had guts then to take on the establishment of the Republican Party. He mobilized his rank and file, he mobilized the base,
Yes.
Trump did, and unleashed them actually against the Republican establishment, and that they were terrified. And they had to back off and retreat and accept Trump and his policies. That's what. Corbyn didn't do that. He didn't do what was necessary, was to carry out a purge, to mobilize his rank and file, to purge the Parliamentary Labour Party of these right-wing gangsters, so-called Labour people, Tories in disguise, or Liberals at best in disguise. Didn't do that. With the result, he left the door open that they could use, they organised a campaign against it with the assistance of the bourgeois press, the media. By the way, there were articles in the time, in the newspapers, in the bourgeois press, admitting that the ruling class had lost control of the Labour Party, which they had.
Yeah.
Or rather, they ought to have lost control of the Labour Party. They didn't, because Corbyn did not give a clean sweep to these gangsters. He preferred unity with the right wing. Unity,
Yeah.
you know.
The same people who are in power now.
That's right. Now, of course, that gave them a chance. Organised a campaign against him, a smear campaign, using so-called identity politics, which is a reactionary thing, by the way, completely reactionary,
Yeah.
which we're opposed to. Anti-Semitism, you see. The moment they mentioned this, he ran like a rabbit. He was like a rabbit, hypnotized like a rabbit in front of a car,
Yeah.
hypnotized by the car lights. He was paralyzed with fear. Instead of facing it up, Trump would have faced it down.
Yeah.
He'd have stood up to it, took them head on. The Zionist establishment, you know, the British Board of Jews, the Jewish Labour MPs, or whatever they call themselves. He'd have taken them on, whole gang of them,
Yeah.
denounced them as right-wingers and purged them. Instead of that, he retreated, and therefore they smashed him. They ended up by expelling him and purging the left. They showed no mercy to the left. The left showed mercy to them. They showed no more mercy to the left whatsoever. And now we are stuck with this gangster Starmer. The whole thing has changed. Now you see, there's a pattern here. What's the pattern? The whole thing is, the international situation everywhere is characterized by colossal instability, political instability. The centre has collapsed. The centre ground has collapsed. They desperately try to prop it up, but it's collapsed. And there's a polarization to the right and to the left.
Yes.
That's a fact. Now, that reflects ultimately a class polarization in the last analysis. And of course, that's the workers, the public, the workers are testing the existing parties and leaders. One by one, they put them to the test. They found they failed, they discard them, and they look elsewhere. And therefore, you get constant swings. You will get constant swings to the left, yes, and also to the right.
Yeah.
To the degree that the left failed, and they failed miserably everywhere, it prepared the way for inevitably a shift to the right. Now, what Trump is offering the working class is an illusion. He wants to put the clock back to the days of Teddy Roosevelt, you know,
Yes.
before the First World War. Yeah, but that was a different historical period. When capitalism was still in an expansionary phase, America was a thrusting young power. Okay, now it's different. Now the United States is in difficulties on an international scale. It finds itself confronted with the rising power of China and Russia. It's compelled to retreat. That's the meaning of Trump's attitude towards Europe.
Yes.
He wants to retreat from Europe because he's got other fish to fry in the Middle East, and above all in relation to China. That's his stuff. But he's promising. And by the way, he's a master of hyperbole, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Everything that he promises is marvelous, wonderful, great, fantastic, enormous. And therefore, colossal illusions have been built up.
Yeah.
Colossal illusions. People believe this because they want to believe it. They want something to believe in. They think they can believe in Trump. Of course, it will lead nowhere. ultimately it's a reactionary utopia that he's promising them. It cannot succeed.
Yes.
The tariffs will not succeed. None of his policies will succeed. And ultimately, the contradictions will emerge. Now, not immediately. The bourgeois, the liberals, the Democrats are hoping that there will be an economic crisis in the States, which is quite likely by the end of the year. It's quite possible.
Yes.
And that this will lead to a collapse of the Trump's movement. It will not. Why? Because, it's an old famous expression. Hope springs eternal in the human breast.
Yes.
Enormous illusions and hopes have been built up among millions of people. It's almost like a religion. You listen to some of these people who support Trump. It's like a religion. They got big illusions now. And these illusions are deeply rooted. They got a material base. And they will not be quickly eradicated. They will not. They will survive for some time. He can survive perhaps the whole period of office and so on. Having said that, you see, first of all, he's getting on in years. Trump, he's not a young man now. He's an old man.
Yeah.
It's highly unlikely that he will stand again as president, even if they could fix the rules, which perhaps they could. Don't be surprised they try anything. There's also the possibility that he'll be assassinated, because that's always, if the establishment can't find any other way of dealing with him, there's always an assassin's bullet, as you've already seen. But either way, Trumpism without Trump is not possible. It's unthinkable. And therefore, eventually, the class contradictions will come to the fore.
Yes.
I mean, within the Trump movement, it's true there are actual fascists,
yes,
or quasi-fascists in the movement, and eventually they will form. They will coalesce to form in the future some kind of extreme right wing, fascist or quasi-fascist or Bonapartist organization, as you wish. But there'll be millions of workers who will move in the opposite direction. Having burnt their fingers with Trump, many of them will be looking for radical solutions on the left. And provided the communists in America, our own communists in America, have maintained a correct attitude, and above all, a correct attitude towards the Trump, the workers who support Trump, the honest ones, not the fascists and the crazed petty bourgeois or the religious maniacs, not those people, but the honest workers that support Trump for the right reasons.
Yes.
The same people that would have supported Bernie Sanders if he'd have stuck to his guns, which he didn't. And therefore, it is entirely possible that you can have a big development on the left, a real third party, which would, in my opinion, be, well, perhaps not immediately. Immediately, it will come with a confused program, all kinds of mixed up elements, even some reactionary elements and so on.
Yes.
But eventually, the pull towards the left, the anti-capitalist pull, if you like,
yes,
in the direction of the left, will prepare the way for a mass communist party at a certain stage, in which our communists, of course, can play a leading role. Now, the same process you will see take place in Britain, in France, and elsewhere. Starmer will very quickly burn his boats. That would eventually prepare the way for the re-emergence of some kind of a left-wing movement.
Yeah.
But all this, of course, is the music of the future. This will not be a quick development. It will take time. It will take time.
Yes, I think that's a perfect way to sum up this episode. It's been very, very interesting to have you on. Just as a final question, in this situation, we're moving into a period of intense crisis, instability, class struggle. And as you say, these phenomena that we're seeing on the rise, these right demagogues, if we may, such as Trump, Farage, Le Pen, we see similar developments. At a certain stage, they will break up and you will have a class polarization, probably the pendulum swinging towards the left. And as communists, we need to prepare for that situation. Now, what I want to ask you is, as a final question is, what is your advice to the communists today? What is the main task of communists preparing for that today?
Well, the first task, of course, is to start to think, to get your ideas straight. Lenin said that without revolutionary theory, there's no revolutionary movement. And above all now, because it's a very confused period, with many confusing elements, I'm not surprised that people are confused and are confused in their attitude towards things like Trump and so on. We need clarity for first point, you know.
Yes.
I mean, above all, we need to find a road to the youth, which is more and more open to these ideas, communist ideas, and also turn towards the workers. Then try to find a road to the workers. Try to find a common language to the workers. There's one thing about Trump that you have to say, he's done that. He speaks the same language as the workers in many respects. And that gets an echo. Now, I don't say that we should certainly not copy Trump's policies. The man is a reactionary. I don't want to say anything. He's a reactionary, yes. However, the biggest mistake, I'll tell you, you ask what the communists should do, I'll tell you what they should not do under any circumstance. The worst mistake they can make is to give some credence to the idea that there's a lesser evil. You know, Trump is bad, and therefore, are the other crowd good? They are not. They're more dangerous to us even than Trump is, and therefore, no question, under any circumstance of appearing under the same banner as the so-called democratic parties, the liberal parties. No way. No. At all times, we maintain an independent class revolutionary communist banner. That, in the last analysis, is the sole guarantee of success. That and patience, a little bit of patience. The workers, people will ask me, when will the revolution take place? When will the workers move? You know, well, I'm expected to give an answer to that. I'll give an answer. I'll give you a precise answer. I'll tell you when the workers will move. The working class in Britain, America, and France, and everywhere, and Russia, they will move when they are ready. Not one moment before, and not one moment afterwards. But we must prepare for that. Prepare by systematic, regular, intelligent work, systematically building up a base, first of all among the youth, and then the other workers, the older workers, the factory workers, the estates, the women, of course, play a very important role, and things of that character. We gradually build the forces, starting with the ones and twos.
Yes.
It's the ones and twos that eventually lead to a broader number of people, which eventually will represent a road to the masses. And that's what's required in order to really change society.
Wow, well, that was a fantastic end to a very, very interesting program. Thank you so much for coming back on, Alan. We need to get you on more often so we can actually deal with all of the things that come up.
That would be very nice.
Yes. For everyone out there who is interested in studying this subject matter further, please go on Marxist.com. From tomorrow, the 21st of March in the morning, we will be publishing Alan's newest article called The Meaning of Donald Trump, a Marxist Analysis. And if you are interested in learning about Marxism on a deeper level, I will highly recommend you reading Alan's books. As I said, the three ones that I'll recommend here, but there are lots of them. I don't have time to list them all. But Bolshevism, The Road to Revolution, which personally for me was my actual first entrance into Marxist theory and changed my life. History of Philosophy, a Marxist perspective, had a similar effect on me. And The Class Struggles in Rome, which depicts the rise and fall of Rome, the fall of Rome, in fact, which had many, many similarities with the period and the epoch that we're going through at the moment. And I am personally...
You forgot Reason and Revolt.
Reason and Revolt, another fantastic book. Reason and Revolt, Marxist philosophy and modern science. And as I said, The Class Struggles in Rome, that I am personally finishing at the moment, which is an amazing, excellent book, and many, many more. And for the rest of you, we will be back against the stream. We'll be back next Thursday, 6 p.m. UK time. My name is Hamid Arizadeh, and I was here today with Alan Woods.